Welcome back, life science learners, to our next segment. As a recap of what we've just looked at, we've looked at the biosphere and we've unpacked the different components of the biosphere. In this segment, we're going to focus on biomes and specifically what is a biome and the different biomes in the context of South Africa. It's important that we recognize that as we start breaking up biospheres, we know that a biosphere contains many biomes. Let's try and understand the context of a biome and its importance. And how do we recognize different biomes in South Africa? So it's important before we get into that to understand that there is an interconnection between the spheres of life. So what do I mean by that? So we saw that life exists in the atmosphere. We know that life forms exist in the lithosphere, as well as life forms existing in the hydrosphere. All of these are interdependent and often depend on each other. Let's try and understand that by looking at the next slide. So life will exist where energy from the sun can interact with the lithosphere, atmosphere, and the hydrosphere. So if we were to try and understand the context of this, so if we were to take just the atmosphere, would that be able to support life? The answer is probably yes. If we were to look at just the hydrosphere, can that support life? Definitely. However, we've got to try and understand the context of all three components being able to collectively support life. We know that the sun is our primary source of energy, and that's the energy that most living organisms can access, either directly or indirectly. Let's try and understand what does this mean in terms of the air. So we know that the air on Earth supports processes like respiration and photosynthesis. We know that those essential processes are crucial to sustaining the production or the conversion of energy from the sun into chemical energy. That chemical energy is often used by organisms that exist on Earth, either on the surface of the Earth or in the lithosphere. Those organisms in turn rely on the hydrosphere, access to water, access to aquatic organisms, and in turn these also produce energy, because we know that most of our phytoplankton that live in water are able to access the energy from the sun and produce what we call glucose, and that energy is available to our aquatic organisms. So it's important that we understand that there's an interconnection between the different components of the biosphere. So life on Earth is supported by a thin zone of soil and air and water. The living organisms are found mostly in the upper layers of the hydrosphere, lithosphere, and the lower layers of the atmosphere. So essentially, as we noted earlier on, is that although the layers of the atmosphere are several kilometers long, it is probably the closest layer to the surface of the Earth that supports life forms. Likewise, when we look at the lithosphere, it is only the top layer that is able to provide and sustain life, and that contains all the nutrients and the fertile soil in which most of our plants and some of our invertebrates are able to access energy. And likewise, if we talk of our aquatic ecosystems, we refer to all the components of the hydrosphere. We know that the oceans are deep, but often it is the most shallow parts of the ocean that supports the ability to have diverse forms of life, because that is where light is able to penetrate, and organisms such as phytoplankton and zooplankton that sustain other life forms. So that is the interconnectedness that we need to look at. So life on Earth is linked to each other and the three spheres. There are two main components in a biosphere that we need to recognize: the biotic and the abiotic components. And we will unpack that in a little while. So when we look at the form of lives existing on Earth, there's an interconnectedness between the three components, but there's also an interdependence between the living components and the non-living components, which we refer to as the abiotic factors. So in this segment, let's try and unpack what is a biome. We know that in the context of South Africa, we are having a diversity of life forms that are found in different areas. And these areas are biomes that are characterized by the typical type of plants and organisms that are found in that area. So a biome is a large area with a specific climate, and these would be influenced by the abiotic components. So the non-living components, things such as climate, temperature, altitude, rainfall. So these are your abiotic components. Biomes contain specific kinds of plants and animals. Generally, we say that a biome is characterized by the types of plants and animals found in that area. So these are typically found. So for example, if you look at your savannas, those have a typical distribution of plants and animals in them. A biome is made up of several ecosystems, and as we discussed earlier on, that we can unpack a biome into different ecosystems. And ecosystems are unique in that they form these little habitats that are identified by the type of organisms that interact with each other and their environment. Biomes can either be terrestrial, which are the ones found on land, or aquatic, the ones found in the water. Our terrestrial biomes are named after the dominant vegetation in that area. So when we unpack our terrestrial biomes, we would need to realize that biomes are often characterized by the type of typical vegetation found in that specific area. So in the context of South Africa, we have different biomes, and these terrestrial biomes are either broken up into the 7 different areas, or our aquatic biomes are also broken up into 3 or 4 different areas. Let's try and unpack what the terrestrial biomes are. As I quickly move to changing the color of my pen, this map indicates the distribution of our 7 biomes. It's important that we recognize that each biome is characterized by the type of plants and animals found in that area. South Africa is home to 7 distinct terrestrial biomes. If we look at it, our savanna biomes, which are coded in red, form predominantly the largest biomes in South Africa. This predominant red color indicates the distribution of that. So if you look at it, it's predominantly in the Northern Cape, Namibia. If we go through along here, the northern parts of Gauteng, and along the east coast of South Africa. The next biome that we look at are your grasslands. And so this is indicated by the key, which is yellow. And so as we know that these are the areas that are typically found along, this would be Gauteng and the southern parts or the northern parts of the KwaZulu-Natal, and then your Bloemfontein in that area there. Other biomes include the Namakuru, which we see in this brown shade here, and these are characterized by the dry, arid conditions found in there. Further, if we move towards the west coast here, we find that this is your succulent Karoo, and these contain plants that are typically adapted to those cold conditions and dry, arid conditions. Unique to South Africa is the Cape fynbos, which we find along the southwestern areas, and these are typical to plants that are endemic to South Africa. If we go further into this, we can see that we've got scatters of these purple areas called the thicket biomes, and these are areas along the eastern coast of South Africa. And then we also need to recognize that we've got forest biomes along the eastern coast of South Africa. So guys, these are the 7 different biomes that we have that are terrestrial. We also need to refer to the aquatic biomes that we have. And these aquatic biomes are areas that are made up of either your freshwater biomes or your marine biomes. And in South Africa, we have a diversity of dams and lakes, rivers and wetlands that make up the freshwater ecosystems. As we have freshwater ecosystems, we also need to recognize that we have your marine ecosystems. And these are ecosystems that contain water that is salty, so they have different percentages or concentrations of salt, as well as different terrains and areas. Your sandy shores, typically found in areas where the beaches are filled with sand. You have rocky shores, which form a different type of biome where the sea or the shore is filled with rocks. You've got coral reefs, which are found along the St. Lucia, which is unique to South Africa, and it's only one predominant area. You've got your mangrove swamps, which are areas where rivers meet and into seas. And then estuaries, which are seen as our important wetlands of South Africa. And we have the open oceans and the open seas, which form predominantly a larger part of the biome.